You're being fired. Evie. And honestly, this company was never going to belong to someone like you. Marla Vance smiled when she said it. Like she had just cleaned a stain off the floor, instead of destroying someone's name in front of an entire office. Beside her, her nephew Brandon leaned back in his chair. Already acting like my desk belonged to him. They called me lazy. They called me ungrateful. They handed me an empty cardboard box and expected me to disappear quietly. What they didn't know was that Evie Carter was not my real name. What they didn't know was that the man whose portrait hung in the lobby, the founder they all pretended to honor, was my grandfather. And what they definitely didn't know was that in 3 days, I would walk back through those same front doors as Evelyn Hart Whitmore. The secret heir holding the one thing they could not charm, threaten, or delete. The truth, with timestamps. You're being terminated for poor performance, chronic laziness, and a bad attitude, the HR director said, loud enough for half the office to hear. Then she slid a cardboard box across the conference table like she was doing me a favor. What she didn't know was that I had spent the last 8 weeks inside that company under a name almost nobody recognized. She also didn't know the founder's last legal instruction was sitting in a sealed envelope upstairs, waiting for me. My name is Evelyn Hart. I was 27. And at the time, everyone at Whitmore Foods in Chicago knew me as Evie Carter, the quiet intern from the community college partnership program. I wore cheap flats, carried a canvas tote, and took the bus when my car stayed parked 2 blocks away. I made copies, updated spreadsheets, listened more than I spoke, and let people decide I was beneath them. That was the point. My grandfather built Whitmore Foods with his hands, and I had come back to learn what kind of people had been holding it after his stroke. The woman firing me was Marla Vance, head of human resources, polished from her pearl earrings to her soft pink manicure. She had a voice that made cruelty sound procedural. Across from me sat her nephew, Brandon, pretending to review something on his phone while a smile kept twitching at the corner of his mouth. He was the real reason I was in that chair. He had failed 2 interviews, missed his assessment test, and still needed a desk, a salary, and a title that looked respectable on LinkedIn. Marla tapped my termination letter with one red nail. This company rewards initiative. Evie. Unfortunately, you've shown none. Her words were smooth, rehearsed, and completely false. For 8 weeks, I had arrived early enough to turn on the lights in the marketing archive. I had corrected invoices nobody else caught. I had stayed late rebuilding a vendor contact database Brandon had accidentally deleted. But I did not argue. I looked at her face, then his, and understood exactly what my grandfather meant when he told me corruption rarely kicks down doors. Sometimes it wears a badge that says human resources. My grandfather, Arthur Whitmore, had not wanted me to inherit anything blind. A company can survive bad numbers, he told me from his hospital bed that spring. It cannot survive people who forget the workers are human. He was 81 then, thinner than I had ever seen him. One hand curled around mine, while machines clicked softly beside him. He had asked me to enter Whitmore quietly. Not as his granddaughter. Not as the heir named in his private trust. But as someone without protection, if they treat you well when they think you have nothing. He said. Then I chose right. That sentence had followed me through every hallway of that building. I heard it when reception forgot my name after telling Brandon, on his first visit, that his smile belonged on the executive floor. I heard it when department managers dumped work on interns and called it learning the business. I heard it when Marla smiled at factory workers during employee appreciation lunches and denied their safety complaints the next morning. I heard it most clearly the day she looked at my clean attendance record and decided to call me lazy anyway. My past with Whitmore was not simple. I had grown up in that company before I knew what a company was. My earliest memories were of the old test kitchen, where my grandfather let me sit on a metal stool and taste cracker samples while line workers slipped me peppermint candies. My mother, his only daughter, died when I was 14, And after that, the family became less like a family and more like a boardroom with teeth. My Aunt Lauren wanted control. My cousins wanted money. My grandfather wanted me to have time to become myself before they started measuring me like an asset. So after college, I left. I became a workplace compliance consultant. The kind of person companies call when they claim they want honesty, but really want clean reports. I learned how to read patterns in schedules, payroll codes, exit interviews, complaint logs, and the small lies managers tell when nobody has challenged them for years. I built a quiet career under my mother's married name, Carter, and stayed away from Whitmore until my grandfather's stroke brought every predator out of the walls. That was when his private attorney called me. "You need to see the company before the vote." "Mr. Bell said. He had served my grandfather for 30 years, and spoke with the tired caution of a man who had watched too many relatives sharpen knives over mahogany tables. "Arthur believes the board has been insulated from the truth. He wants you to observe from inside." Then he slid a folder across his desk with a temporary internship placement, a plain ID badge, and one instruction written in my grandfather's shaky hand. "Do not announce yourself until you know who deserves to stay." I accepted the internship because I trusted my grandfather, but also because some part of me needed to know whether the place I loved as a child had become something I should let die. Whitmore Foods was not glamorous. It made shelf-stable soups, sauces, and packaged meals sold in grocery stores across the Midwest. Its heart was not the executive's floor with glass walls and espresso machines. Its heart was the people in hairnets who worked through back pain, the accountants who knew every vendor by voice, the warehouse crews who remembered when Arthur Whitmore walked the loading docks every Friday. But that heart was being squeezed. By my second week, I noticed the pattern. Older workers were pushed toward voluntary transitions after raising concerns. Interns without family connections were buried in clerical work and then marked as unmotivated. Marla's friends received openings before jobs were posted. Brandon's name appeared in meeting notes for a role that technically did not exist yet. Every time someone questioned it, Marla used the same words: culture fit, loyalty, gratitude, family. She said family like a shield. She used it like a knife. I kept notes, but not like someone plotting revenge. At least not at first. I kept notes because that was my training. Date, time, speaker, exact phrase, related file, possible witness. I saved copies of task assignments in a private folder on the company system, because the internship agreement allowed project documentation for educational review. I took screenshots of the work queue before Brandon touched it. I emailed status updates to my supervisor, Gina Patel, who managed product operations and treated every intern like a person with a future. Gina replied every time. That mattered more than she knew. Gina was the first person at Whitmore who made me question whether my grandfather had been right to hope. She was in her early 50s. Practical, sharp, and too busy to perform kindness. On my third day, she found me standing beside the copier with a broken tray in my hands, while two managers laughed from the hallway. She did not laugh. She fixed the tray, handed me a binder, and said, "Around here, some people confuse quiet with stupid. Don't help them by believing it." I almost told her who I was right then. Instead, I stayed quiet. I watched. I learned which employees lowered their voices when Marla passed. I learned that Brandon had already bragged to a junior recruiter that his aunt was clearing dead weight for him. I learned that 2 interns before me had left in tears after receiving poor reviews written by people who had never supervised them. I learned that my grandfather's name was still on the lobby wall, but his rules had been treated like outdated wallpaper. People admired the founder in public and ignored him in practice. The first real confrontation came on a Wednesday afternoon in the break room. I was heating soup from the test kitchen when Brandon walked in wearing a visitor badge and a watch too expensive for someone without a job. He looked at my lunch, then at my ID badge, and said, "You're Evie." "Right. The intern my aunt says can't keep up." 3 people went quiet around us. I closed the microwave door and said, "I keep up fine." He smiled as if I had entertained him. Don't take it personally. Some people are just placeholders. That word stayed with me. Placeholder. He meant I was holding his place until Marla could remove me cleanly. He meant my work, my time, my dignity, and my future were temporary obstacles in his path. I wanted to tell him that my grandfather's initials were carved into the cornerstone downstairs. I wanted to tell him that the board vote deciding permanent control of Whitmore was 12 days away and that his aunt's personnel files were already under review, but anger is expensive when you still need evidence. So I took my soup and walked out. The firing happened 2 days later. Marla called it an early performance separation, scheduled for 4:30 on a Friday. Because cowards love doing damage when everyone else is thinking about the weekend. She did not invite Gina. She did not provide my evaluation packet. She did not mention the completed projects sitting under my name. She simply brought Brandon, closed the conference room door, and began speaking as though the decision had been painful for her. We gave you an opportunity, she said. And frankly, you did not show gratitude. I looked through the glass wall behind her and saw people pretending not to watch. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved it was not them. One woman from payroll pressed her lips together, then looked down at her keyboard. The public part was intentional. Marla wanted a warning sent through the floor. Anyone without protection could be erased. And the paperwork would call it performance. Brandon leaned back in his chair as if the room already belonged to him. My cardboard box sat between us. Empty. Because I had never brought much that could be taken. Then Marla made the mistake that changed everything. She pushed a second document toward me and said, "You'll sign this before you leave. It confirms you won't discuss your experience here, including with employees, vendors, or outside parties." It was not a standard internship exit form. It was a gag order dressed up as a confidentiality acknowledgement. Written badly. Probably by someone who thought fear made documents legal. I read it once. Then again. While my pulse slowed. There, in the third paragraph, was language referring to nepotism allegations. I had never used that word with her. I lifted my eyes. Why would an intern need to sign something about nepotism allegations? Marla's face changed for less than a second. But it was enough. Brandon stopped smiling. She reached for the paper as if she had handed me the wrong napkin at lunch. "That is standard language," she said. "It protects the company from disgruntled former participants." I placed my hand lightly on top of the page before she could pull it back. "Then I'll need a copy for my records." Her voice hardened. "You are not entitled to one." That was when I knew she was not just bending rules. She was hiding a pattern. I had seen enough companies panic to recognize the smell. Real policies are boring. Fake policies sweat. Marla stood up, walked to the conference room door, and opened it wide, forcing the office to hear the end. "Evie, your internship is over. Security will walk you out." Her tone was soft, almost maternal, as if humiliating me gently made it humane. "And I strongly suggest you learn some humility before your next opportunity." I picked up the empty cardboard box and stood. My hands were steady, which surprised me. Maybe pain has a limit. And after you pass it, the body gets quiet. I walked past Brandon first. He muttered, "Tough break. Placeholder." I did not look at him. I walked past Marla next, close enough to smell her expensive perfume. She whispered, "This company is family-run. You were never going to belong here." That was her anchor. The sentence she thought would bury me. She had no idea it was the sentence I would bring back to her. Security was an older man named Luis. And he looked miserable when he met me by the elevators. "I'm sorry, Miss Carter," he said under his breath. "Orders." I nodded because he was not my enemy. As we rode down, the elevator doors reflected my face back at me, brown hair pinned too tightly, eyes too calm, cheeks pale with humiliation. I refused to show upstairs. My grandfather's portrait hung across from the lobby doors. Arthur Whitmore, smiling in black and white. sleeves rolled, hands dusted with flour from the first production line. For one moment, I nearly cried. Not because Marla had fired me. Not because Brandon had laughed. I nearly cried because the company my grandfather built had forced decent people to apologize for following indecent orders. That kind of rot does not begin with one bad HR director. It spreads when everyone learns survival means silence. I stepped into the lobby holding an empty box and looked at my grandfather's portrait. Under it, engraved in brass, were his old words. We earn trust by how we treat those without power. Outside, the late afternoon air hit my face. Cold enough to sting. My phone buzzed before I reached the sidewalk. It was an email from Gina. Sent 3 minutes after Marla called me into the conference room. The subject line was simple: for your records. Attached were my completed project summaries, her written performance notes, time-stamped task assignments, and a message that made me stop walking. Evie, I don't know what they told you in there, but I know what work you did. I won't let them rewrite it. I stood under the awning while office workers moved around me. And for the first time that day, I smiled. It was small and tired, but it was real. Marla had fired the intern to make room for her nephew. She had used a fake performance claim, an illegal-looking silence form, and a public walkout to make sure nobody questioned her. She believed I would disappear, because people like me always disappeared from her files. But she did not know about the sealed envelope upstairs. She did not know about my grandfather's vote. And she definitely did not know that Monday morning I would return to Whitmore Foods through the front doors. Not as Evie Carter, the lazy intern, but as Evelyn Hart Whitmore, the founder's heir. Carrying the one thing Marla Vance feared most, the truth with timestamps. By the time I reached my apartment, the cardboard box was still empty. But my hands felt like they had carried something heavy for miles. I lived in a one-bedroom place in Logan Square above a bakery that opened at 5 every morning. And usually the smell of bread made the whole building feel forgiving. That night, it only made me angry. I set the box on my kitchen table, opened my laptop, and downloaded every attachment Gina had sent before anyone could tell her to delete it. I did not sleep much. I kept replaying Marla's voice. Not because her opinion mattered, but because humiliation has a way of echoing long after the person leaves the room. Lazy. Bad attitude. No gratitude. Those words were not random. They were designed to make anyone who defended me look foolish. If I challenged her, I was bitter. If I stayed quiet, I was guilty. That was the trap she had built for every intern, every warehouse clerk, every tired employee who had ever learned that telling the truth could cost them their paycheck. Around midnight, Mr. Bell called. He never called after 9 unless something had shifted. Evelyn, he said. Your badge was deactivated at 5:06. His voice was even, but I heard the tension under it. I know. I looked at the empty box on my table. Marla fired me in front of Brandon. There was a pause. Not shock exactly. More like confirmation. Did she give you paperwork? I almost laughed. She tried. Then she decided I was not entitled to a copy. Mr. Bell exhaled slowly. That was unwise of her. I told him about the silence form, the nepotism language, the public walkout, and the phrase, Marla whispered beside the conference room door. This company is family-run. You were never going to belong here. Mr. Bell went quiet for so long that I checked whether the call had dropped. Then he said, your grandfather anticipated arrogance, not stupidity. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. He knew it could be bad. Mr. Bell answered softly. He knew power changes people. He wanted to know who had changed with it. The next morning, I drove to the rehabilitation center where my grandfather had been moved after his stroke. He was improving, but speech still came slowly, and one side of his face drooped when he was tired. I had not planned to tell him everything yet. Some truths feel too sharp to lay beside a hospital bed. But Arthur Whitmore had spent a lifetime reading people. And the moment I walked in, his eyes moved from my face to my empty hands. "They did it," he said. Each word rough but clear. I sat beside him and took his hand. The skin felt thinner than it used to. But his grip was still stubborn. "Marla terminated the internship," I said. "She claimed performance issues." My grandfather stared at the window, where morning light was crawling across the blinds. He did not look surprised. That hurt more than surprise would have. "Brandon?" he asked. I nodded. He was there. A bitter little smile pulled at his mouth. Cowards like witnesses when they think witnesses belong to them. Then he turned back to me. "Did you break?" That question almost undid me. Not "are you okay?" Not "do you want me to stop this?" Did you break? Because he knew the difference between pain and surrender. I shook my head. But my throat tightened. "No." His thumb pressed weakly against mine. "Good." For a moment. He was not the founder or the man whose name stood in brass downstairs. He was just my grandfather. The person who had taught me to stir sauce clockwise because patience tastes better than speed. His eyes softened. "Then we keep going." He told me something I had not known. 3 months before his stroke, he had received an anonymous letter from someone inside Whitmore. It accused Marla of manipulating intern evaluations, burying complaints, and preparing a job opening for Brandon before the board approved the position. The letter had no signature. Only photocopies of schedule changes and review forms with identical language. My grandfather had asked Marla about it directly. She smiled, expressed concern about disgruntled temporary staff, and offered to handle an internal review. He did not let her. Instead, he asked Mr. Bell to amend the transition plan. The board believed control of Arthur's voting shares would move to a family trust after his recovery assessment. What they did not know was that my grandfather had already named me as successor trustee under a private clause that activated if he could no longer serve full-time. The sealed envelope upstairs contained the formal notice. I knew about the inheritance. I did not know the activation date had moved forward to the following Monday. Marla had fired me 3 days before I gained the authority to review her department. I sat very still while he explained. Anger is different when it becomes useful. Before that morning, I had thought I was gathering evidence for my grandfather. Something to help him decide what to fix. Now I understood the company was already at the edge of a handoff. And people like Marla were rushing to stack chairs before the new owner walked in. "Why didn't you tell me Monday was the date?" I asked. His answer came slowly. "Because if you knew power was coming, you might stand differently. I needed them to see you powerless." That was hard to hear. Even from him. I pulled my hand back and looked at the old man in the bed. The man I loved. The man who had let me walk into a room where people could hurt me. I was humiliated. I said. My voice stayed low. But it shook. In front of an entire floor. His eyes filled. And for the first time, he looked less like a founder and more like a grandfather who had miscalculated the cost. "I know," he said. "And I am sorry. But now you know what they do when nobody is watching." I wanted to forgive that instantly. I did not. Love does not erase the need for boundaries. And I had learned that lesson before I ever entered Whitmore. After my mother died, relatives spoke about me like inheritance furniture. Aunt Lauren told my grandfather I needed stability. Then tried to move me into a boarding school 3 states away because I made family meetings uncomfortable. Cousin Derek once joked that I was the sentimental liability. They smiled at birthdays and counted shares at funerals. Family, I had learned early, was often the word people used when they wanted access without accountability. When I left the rehab center, I sat in my car for nearly 20 minutes before starting the engine. I was angry at Marla. I was angry at Brandon. I was angry at my grandfather for sending me in blind and at myself for still wanting to protect his heart from the truth. Then I opened my phone and looked again at Gina's email. The attachments were ordinary on the surface spreadsheets. Comments. Status updates. Task logs. But together, They proved one clean thing. I had worked. They had lied. On Sunday afternoon, Gina called from a blocked number. Her voice was brisk, but I could hear noise in the background, like she was standing outside. I probably shouldn't be calling, she said. Then why are you? I asked. She sighed. Because they're rewriting the internship files? My fingers tightened around the phone. Who? HR. Marla's assistant requested access to all intern evaluations from the past 18 months. Yours already has new notes added. Missed deadlines. Poor communication. Resistance to feedback. None of that was there Friday morning. I walked to my desk and opened a notebook. Can you prove the edits? Gina hesitated. I can prove when my version was submitted. I can prove the file changed after your termination. I can prove my manager's signature was attached to comments I didn't write. That last part landed like a stone dropped into still water. Gina, I said carefully. Do not risk your job for me. She gave a dry laugh. Evie, I'm not risking it for you. I'm risking it because I have signed my name to enough things in this building that I still want it to mean something. That was the first time I realized the reversal would not be mine alone. People think revenge is one person coming back with a dramatic secret. Real accountability is quieter. It is a payroll clerk saving an email because something feels wrong. It is a manager refusing to let her signature be weaponized. It is a security guard apologizing in an elevator because he still knows the difference between policy and decency. Marla had controlled people by isolating them. She made everyone believe they were the only one uncomfortable. She had never prepared for them to become witnesses. Gina sent me one more file before hanging up. It was a screenshot of an internal calendar invite for Monday at 9:30. The title was Internship Program Restructure and Talent Placement. Attendees included Marla, Brandon, 2 executives from operations, 1 finance director, and my Aunt Lauren, who still held a family board seat though she had never worked a full week inside the company. Brandon was listed as incoming associate coordinator. My terminated intern slot had not even cooled before they built his job on top of it. I stared at my aunt's name longer than I stared at Brandon's. Lauren Whitmore Sloan had perfected the art of looking wounded while pushing people off ledges. After my mother died, she brought casseroles, kissed my forehead, and told reporters the family was holding Evelyn close. Then she spent the next decade trying to convince my grandfather I was too emotional, too independent, too much like my mother to be trusted with company matters. If Marla was moving Brandon into place, Lauren had either approved it or chosen not to care. Both options told me enough. Sunday evening, Mr. Bell arrived at my apartment with a leather document case and the expression of a man carrying weather. He placed 3 folders on my table. The first contained my grandfather's transition documents. The second contained the anonymous complaint packet. The third was thinner, marked with my name in Arthur's handwriting. Inside was a letter he had written before I entered Whitmore. Evelyn, if you are reading this after being hurt, I failed to protect you from the lesson. Do not let that failure stop you from using what you learned. I read the letter twice. My anger did not vanish, but it changed shape. It became cleaner. My grandfather had made a painful choice. Maybe not a perfect one, but the people who chose cruelty with full freedom were still responsible for their choices. Marla did not have to lie. Brandon did not have to smirk. Lauren did not have to sit on that invite while her niece was erased from a file. They had all mistaken silence for weakness because silence had always worked before. Mr. Bell then explained the procedure for Monday. At 8:30, the board would receive formal notice that Arthur's voting control had transferred to me as successor trustee. At 9, I would enter the building with Mr. Bell and request immediate access to HR records under the transition authority. At 9:30, Marla's meeting would begin if nobody stopped it. Do you want to cancel their invite? He asked. I looked at the printed calendar screenshot. No. He studied me over his glasses. No, I shook my head. Let them gather everyone they wanted to impress. That night, I took the cheap flats from my closet and placed them beside the polished black heels I wore for client audits. The flats belonged to Evie Carter, the intern who carried files and made coffee, no one thanked her for. The heels belonged to Evelyn Hart Whitmore, but I did not put them out because I wanted to look powerful. I put them out because I wanted to remember that both women were real. The one they humiliated had earned the right to stand beside the one they feared. Before bed, I printed Gina's email, the task logs, the altered evaluation notice, the calendar invite, and the internship agreement showing my right to retain project documentation. I slid them into a navy folder and labeled it with one word: timestamps. Not proof, not revenge. Timestamps. Because time was the one witness Marla could not intimidate. Every lie she told had been placed somewhere on a clock, and every clock had kept moving without asking her permission. Monday morning. I arrived at Whitmore Foods at 8:52. The lobby smelled the same as it had on Friday. Coffee, floor polish, and the faint sweetness from the test kitchen vents. Luis was at the security desk. When he saw me, his eyebrows lifted. Then his eyes moved to Mr. Bell beside me. I handed him my ID. Not the intern badge, but my driver's license. Mr. Bell placed the sealed envelope on the desk and said, "Please notify the executive floor that Ms. Whitmore has arrived." Luis looked at me again. And this time he saw it. Not because I had changed so much, but because the last name had. His mouth parted slightly. I gave him a small nod. He picked up the phone with a hand that was trying not to shake. Behind him, my grandfather's portrait watched the lobby like it always had. Underneath it, the brass words caught the light. "We earn trust by how we treat those without power." The elevator doors opened. Marla Vance stepped out, laughing with Brandon beside her. Both dressed for victory. She saw Mr. Bell first. Then she saw me. The laugh died on her face so completely that the lobby seemed to go quiet around it. Brandon looked confused, then annoyed, then uncertain as his eyes dropped to the navy folder in my hand. I did not smile. I did not raise my voice. I simply held Marla's gaze and said, "Good morning. I believe you have a 9:30 meeting about replacing me." Marla recovered faster than Brandon did. People like her always do. Her face tightened into the professional expression she used when something ugly needed to be hidden under policy. "Ms. Carter," she said, emphasizing the wrong name like it could still protect her. "This is a restricted area for former interns." Mr. Bell opened the sealed envelope and handed Luis a copy of the formal notice. "Her name is Ms. Whitmore," he said. "And as of 8:30 this morning, she is the authorized successor trustee of Arthur Whitmore's controlling shares." The lobby did not explode. Real shock is quieter than that. Luis froze with the phone in his hand. A receptionist stopped typing. Brandon stared at me like the room had tilted and he was waiting for someone else to fix the floor. Marla's eyes flicked from my face to the notice. Then to Mr. Bell, searching for a mistake she could turn into authority. "This is highly irregular," she said. I held the navy folder against my side. "So, was firing an intern on false performance claims 3 days before appointing your nephew to her place." Brandon stepped forward before Marla could stop him. "Wait. You're Arthur's granddaughter," his voice cracked on my grandfather's name. And for one small second, I saw the math happening behind his eyes. Every joke. Every smirk. Placeholder. He was not sorry. He was frightened that he had misjudged my usefulness. That distinction matters. Marla put a hand on his arm. But her own fingers were stiff. "We should take this upstairs," she said. "No," I answered. "We'll take this through the front desk. With visitor badges and a record. I like records." Mr. Bell requested temporary executive access for me, and Luis processed it with a care that bordered on ceremony. When he handed the badge across the desk, his eyes met mine. "Welcome back, Ms. Whitmore," he said. The words traveled farther than he intended. By the elevators, Two employees turned. On the mezzanine, someone leaned over the railing. I clipped the badge to my jacket. Not because I needed the symbol, but because I wanted every person watching to understand something. The badge had changed. The person wearing it had not. We rode upstairs in an elevator that felt too small for all the silence packed into it. Marla stood in the corner, facing forward. Her chin lifted. Brandon kept checking his phone as if a text might arrive, canceling consequences. Mr. Bell stood beside me with the document case held in both hands. Nobody spoke until the doors opened onto the executive floor. Then Marla said, softly enough for only me to hear, "You should be very careful, Evelyn. Family companies are delicate." I looked at her reflection in the elevator doors. So are people. The 9:30 meeting was still on the calendar. I wanted it that way. Marla had invited the witnesses she believed would watch Brandon's rise. She had invited operations, finance, my Aunt Lauren, and two senior managers who had learned to nod before they understood what they were approving. When we entered the glass conference room, Lauren was already seated with a coffee cup in one hand and a disappointed expression arranged on her face. It was the same expression she wore at my mother's funeral when I cried too loudly for her taste. "Evelyn," Lauren said, as though I had arrived late to brunch instead of to my own erasure. "This is not the appropriate way to handle a transition." I sat across from her and placed the Navy folder on the table. Appropriate would have been telling the board that HR was clearing a position for Marla's nephew through a falsified termination. Marla's mouth tightened. "That is an outrageous accusation." I looked at Brandon. "Then it should be easy to disprove." He looked away. The first crack in the room was not loud, but everyone heard it. "Mr. Bell began with the legal notice. He did not dramatize it. He read the transfer of voting authority, the activation clause, and my right to immediate operational review during the transition period. People shifted in their chairs as the language settled over them. Lauren kept her eyes on the table, but her fingers tapped once against her cup. She had known about the possibility, maybe not the timing, but enough. That tap told me more than her face did. My aunt had been waiting for a cleaner battlefield and had found herself in the wrong war. Marla tried to regain control with process. "No one here objects to proper governance," she said. "However, personnel decisions involve confidential matters. Discussing a former intern's performance in this room would be inappropriate." It was almost elegant, the way she tried to wrap the lie in privacy. I opened my folder and slid out the first page. "I agree. So let's discuss process, not feelings." I placed Gina's submitted performance notes in the center of the table. "This is the evaluation filed by my direct supervisor on Thursday at 3:14 p.m. Then I placed the second page beside it. "This is the evaluation exported from HR records Sunday at 11:42 a.m. after my termination." Same supervisor signature. Different comments. The finance director leaned forward. Operations went still. Marla did not look at the pages. That was how I knew she already understood the problem. Brandon squinted like the documents were written in another language. Lauren finally picked one up. "Read 3 lines." And set it down as if the paper had become warm. Marla's voice sharpened. "Draft records often contain revisions." I nodded. "They do. That is why timestamps matter." I removed the next sheet. Gina Patel's original submission was locked on Thursday. The critical comments were added after my badge was deactivated. Using HR administrative access. Gina did not write them. She did not approve them. And unless the company is comfortable attaching managers' signatures to words they never wrote, we should stop pretending this is a routine revision. A senior operations manager named Calvin Reese cleared his throat. "Is Gina aware her name was used?" Marla turned to him quickly. "Calvin. This is exactly why we should not." "Yes," I said. "She is aware." I did not mention the blocked call. I did not need to. She preserved her submission confirmation and is willing to provide a statement. Marla's face hardened at the word statement. People who rely on quiet workers hate statements. Statements take private discomfort and give it a spine. Lauren leaned back slowly. Even assuming there was an administrative mistake. Evelyn. Your presence here under an alias raises serious concerns. There it was. The pivot. When the truth corners a powerful person, they do not answer it. They question the right of the injured person to have noticed. I folded my hands on the table. I entered through a legitimate internship partnership under my mother's married name. My application was approved by HR. My work was assigned by operations. My status did not authorize anyone to falsify records. Brandon finally spoke. And it was the worst thing he could have done. Come on. This is insane. It was an internship. She was going to leave anyway. The room looked at him. He seemed encouraged by the attention, and continued. My aunt said the slot was basically wasted. I already know the company culture. My family has been around here for years. I turned to him. You were not employed here. His jaw flexed. Not yet. But your title was already on the calendar invite. I slid the screenshot across the table. Incoming associate coordinator. Calvin read the invite. Then passed it to finance. The silence changed. Before, it was shock. Now it was calculation. Executives understand risk when it is printed with names attached. Marla reached for the screenshot. This was a planning placeholder. The word hit the table like a dropped glass. Placeholder. I looked at Brandon. And for the first time, I let him see that I remembered. His face flushed. I said, interesting choice of words. He looked down. Marla's hand froze over the paper. Then withdrew. Mr. Bell opened the anonymous complaint packet next. I did not enjoy that part. There is a difference between exposing someone and watching years of small injuries line up in public. 2 interns marked poor culture fit after refusing unpaid weekend work. 1 warehouse clerk's harassment complaint downgraded to communication friction. 3 internal postings delayed until preferred candidates were ready. Identical review language used across different departments. Different supervisors. Different months. The pattern was not dramatic. It was worse. It was boring. Repeated. And comfortable. Marla denied each item separately. Because that is how people try to kill a pattern. They pull it apart and demand you prove every thread is a rope. Misinterpreted. Taken out of context. Manager discretion. Confidential. Legacy issue. She said the words cleanly, with just enough offense to suggest the real wrongdoing was asking. But every explanation made the room colder. By the time she reached the phrase, family loyalty, even Calvin looked tired. I thought of my grandfather's hospital hand in mine. I thought of him asking, did you break? Then the door opened. And Gina Patel stepped in. Marla's head snapped toward her. This meeting is closed. Gina did not flinch. She wore a gray blazer, carried a thin laptop, and looked exactly like a woman who had finished being afraid. I was invited by Ms. Whitmore, she said. I had not invited her. Not formally. But Mr. Bell, apparently, had. He gave me the smallest glance. And I understood he had prepared for the moment when documents needed a human voice. Gina set her laptop on the table. My signature was used on statements I did not write. The room went very still. Gina opened her laptop and projected her original submission confirmation onto the wall screen. Date. Time. File name. Supervisor ID. Then she opened the altered version, exported from the HR portal. The added comments glowed in plain black text. Cruel in their blandness. Poor initiative. Requires excessive direction. Questionable attitude toward authority. Gina pointed to the last line. I have never written that phrase in an employee evaluation in my life. I manage food production timelines. I do not diagnose obedience. Someone in finance made a sound that was almost a laugh, then covered it with a cough. Marla stood. Gina. You are exposing confidential employee records. Gina looked at her without blinking. No. I am exposing forged comments under my name. It was the first sentence in that room that felt like a door opening. Not a speech. Not revenge. Just a fact. Clean enough to stand on its own. Brandon shifted in his chair. Lauren looked at Marla now. Really looked at her. As if deciding whether loyalty was still profitable, Marla changed tactics again. Evelyn. I understand this has become emotional for you. My aunt nodded faintly. Grateful for the old family script. Emotional. Difficult. Unstable. Like my mother. Like me at 14. I let the word pass through the room and die without feeding it. Then I opened the last section of my folder. I am not here to discuss my emotions. I am here because you terminated me under false pretenses. Attempted to secure my silence with an improper document. Altered records after the fact. And prepared a role for your nephew before this company approved it. Brandon muttered. This is a setup. I looked at him. No. A setup requires inventing facts. I just kept the ones you gave me. That landed harder than I expected. His face went red. And for a moment I thought he might say something worse. Marla stopped him with one look. That look told the room everything about who had trained him to expect rescue. He was not the architect. He was the beneficiary. But people who benefit from harm do not get to call themselves innocent just because someone else built the machine. I asked Mr. Bell to distribute the final document. It was the internship agreement Marla's own department had issued to me, including the educational documentation clause. You may wonder why I have copies, I said. This agreement gave me the right to retain task summaries, supervisor feedback, and project records for academic and professional review. HR approved that clause. Every document I preserved came from work assigned to me or communications sent to me. Marla's face had gone pale now. Not because she feared my pain, because she feared my precision. Calvin turned to Marla. Did you attempt to have her sign a separation silence form? Marla lifted her chin. A standard confidentiality acknowledgement. I removed a handwritten note from my folder. Written Friday night, while the memory was fresh. Including the exact clause I had seen about nepotism allegations. I requested a copy. You refused. Finance looked at Marla. Is there a template for that form? Marla said nothing. Mr. Bell closed his document case. We will require preservation of all HR templates, drafts, metadata, and access logs effective immediately. That was the moment Marla understood this would not end in the conference room. Her expression did not collapse. People like her rarely give you the satisfaction. But the control left her eyes. She sat down slowly. Every pearl and polished nail still perfect. And said, I acted in what I believed was the company's best interest. There it was. The final refuge. The company. Not the workers. Not the truth. Not the law. The company. As if a building could ask her to lie. I looked at her for a long second. My grandfather taught me that the company's best interest begins with not destroying people who cannot fight back. Then I closed the folder. I did not fire her in that moment. I wanted to. But anger had brought me to the door. Not through it. Through it required process. The same process she had twisted against everyone else. Effective immediately. HR record access is suspended, pending independent review. Brandon's proposed placement is frozen. Gina's evaluation is restored. And nobody in this room is to contact past interns, except through counsel or the review team. Lauren's head lifted. You cannot simply walk in here and take over operations because you are upset. I turned to my aunt. And all the childhood exhaustion rose behind my ribs. Every family dinner where she corrected my grief. Every phone call where she asked about my grandfather's health before asking about mine. Every warning that I needed to be reasonable. Which always meant smaller. I did not walk in because I was upset. I said. I walked in because Arthur Whitmore gave me authority after watching people like you confuse family with ownership. Her face changed. It was not guilt. It was offense. People who feel entitled to your obedience experience boundaries as betrayal. Be careful, she said quietly. There are consequences to embarrassing this family. I stood then. Not quickly. Not dramatically. There were consequences to embarrassing me. 2. You just assumed I was the only one who would have to live with them. Gina looked down at her laptop. Calvin looked away. Mr. Bell did not move. Lauren's mouth opened. Then closed again. The meeting ended without a clean explosion. Marla was escorted not by security, but by procedure. Her system access was restricted. Her assistant was placed on administrative hold. Brandon was told to leave the premises as a visitor with no employment status. He looked stunned. Then angry. Then young, in the worst possible way. Like a boy discovering that family connections were not gravity. As he passed me, he whispered. You ruined my career. I answered without turning. No, you tried to start it on top of someone else's grave. After they left, the room emptied slowly. Some executives avoided my eyes. Others offered careful words about review, transparency, and next steps. I accepted none of it as virtue. Institutions love accountability once liability enters the room. Still, something had shifted. Gina packed her laptop, then paused beside me. You okay? She asked. I almost said yes. Instead, I told the truth. Not yet. She nodded, like she respected that answer more. Good. Okay usually comes after the paperwork. By noon, the entire building knew. Not the details. Not yet. But enough. The lazy intern had returned with the founder's name. HR was under review. Brandon had been escorted out. Marla's office door was closed. And IT had changed the lock on the records archive. As I walked past the same floor where people had watched me carry an empty box, conversations stopped again. This time the silence was different. It was not pity. It was not mockery. It was the sound people make when a story they accepted too easily begins rewriting itself in front of them. I stopped by my old intern desk before leaving for a board call. Someone had already cleared it. The cheap pens were gone. The sticky notes were gone. The little ceramic mug Gina had loaned me was sitting upside down beside the monitor. I touched it once, and felt the strangest sadness. Evie Carter had existed there. She had been underestimated there. She had been humiliated there. And even though Evelyn Whitmore had walked back in with authority, Evie deserved an apology no title could give her. Then my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. For a moment I thought it would be Brandon or Marla. Some desperate threat, dressed as outrage. But it was worse in a quieter way. This is Lauren. Come to the family house tonight. We need to discuss how to contain this before Arthur hears a distorted version. I stared at the message until the words blurred slightly. Contain this. Not fix it. Not apologize. Contain it. They still thought the truth was the danger. I looked down the hallway toward my grandfather's portrait at the far end. Smaller from this distance but still visible. The brass words beneath it caught the noon light. We earn trust by how we treat those without power. My aunt wanted a private family meeting, which meant she wanted pressure without witnesses. She wanted old guilt, old grief, old rules. She wanted the orphaned girl back at the table, obedient and outnumbered. I typed one sentence back. I'll come at 7. Then I added a second. Mr. Bell will attend. The reply came almost immediately. That won't be necessary. I smiled, then. But there was no warmth in it. Because, for the first time in my life, I understood that necessary was exactly what people called witnesses when they feared the truth. At 7 that evening, the family house looked exactly the way I remembered and nothing like home. It sat in Winnetka behind iron gates. All limestone. Clipped hedges. And windows glowing warm enough to fool strangers. My grandfather had bought it when my mother was young. Back when success still embarrassed him a little. After she died, every room changed. The laughter left first. Then the photographs moved. Then people started speaking about legacy more than love. And the house became less a shelter than a stage. Mr. Belle arrived 5 minutes after me, carrying the same leather document case. Lauren opened the door herself, which told me she wanted control from the first second. She wore cream, silk, and a wounded expression, as if I had inconvenienced her by showing up with boundaries. Behind her stood my cousin Derek, his wife, and two family board allies who had no reason to be there except pressure. Lauren's eyes flicked to Mr. Bell. I said that wouldn't be necessary. I stepped inside, and I decided it was. The dining room table was set with coffee no one drank. That was how Whitmores handled conflict. They placed porcelain between themselves and the truth. Lauren sat at the head of the table, my grandfather's chair. Without hesitation. I noticed it. And so did Mr. Bell. Evelyn, she began. Today was unfortunate. I remained standing. No. Friday was unfortunate. Today was documented. Derek scoffed. You embarrassed the company because some HR woman hurt your feelings. I turned to him slowly. She falsified records. He waved a hand. Same difference in a lawsuit. That sentence clarified the room. They were not confused. They were calculating exposure. Lauren folded her hands. No one is defending mistakes. But you must understand the optics. Arthur is fragile. The board is nervous. Public scandal could damage jobs. Partnerships. The family name. Family name? There it was again. Polished and placed on the table like silverware. I looked at each face and understood they had gathered not to ask what happened, but to ask how much truth I was willing to bury to keep them comfortable. I sat down across from Lauren, leaving my grandfather's chair occupied by the person who had wanted it most. What are you asking me to do? I asked. Lauren softened her voice. That was always the dangerous version. Pause the review. Let Marla resign quietly. Approve Brandon's placement in a different department after a cooling-off period. Make a statement that your internship experience was part of an internal leadership assessment, not misconduct. We can preserve dignity for everyone. I almost admired the language. It turned a cover-up into compassion. Mr. Bell did not move, but I saw his hand rest lightly on the document case. Lauren saw it too. This is a family matter, she said sharply. No, I said. It became a company matter when employees' records were altered. Derek leaned forward. You think you're ready to run this place because Grandpa handed you papers. You spent 2 months making copies. I looked at him. And in 2 months of making copies, I found what none of you wanted to see. His face flushed. But he had no answer. Lauren's mask slipped just enough. Arthur should never have put this burden on you. I felt that old sting. The one she had been pressing since I was 14. Too emotional. Too young. Too much, my mother. I kept my voice even. He put trust in me. There's a difference. She stood then, palms flat on the table. Trust without judgment is sentimentality. You are about to endanger a company thousands of people rely on because you want revenge for being embarrassed. The room waited for me to flinch. I opened my folder and placed a printed copy of Marla's altered evaluation on the table. Then, Gina's original. Then, the calendar invite. Then the anonymous complaint packet. One page after another. Clean and quiet. This is not revenge, I said. This is the part where the story stops being controlled by the people who benefited from silence. Lauren stared at the papers but did not touch them. You have no idea how much damage this could cause. I nodded. I know exactly how much damage silence already caused. That was when Mr. Bell opened his case. There is one more document, he said. Lauren's eyes narrowed. He removed a sealed copy of my grandfather's personal memorandum to the board. Dated 6 weeks before his stroke. Arthur instructed me to release this only if the family attempted to interfere with Miss Whitmore's independent review. The room went cold. Lauren reached for the envelope. Mr. Bell lifted it out of reach with the calm of a man who had outlived intimidation. It has already been delivered electronically to the board. Derek cursed under his breath. Lauren's face went pale with fury. What does it say? she demanded. Mr. Bell looked to me. And I nodded. He read only the relevant part. Arthur had written that any family member who pressured, obstructed, or retaliated against Evelyn during the transition would be removed from any advisory role tied to the voting trust. He had named the behavior precisely: private intimidation, reputation threats, attempts to suppress employee complaints. He had known them better than they knew themselves. For the first time that night, Lauren looked afraid. Not guilty. Afraid. Arthur was not well when he wrote that. Her voice had lost its silk. He was clear. Mr. Bell said. His physician signed capacity confirmation the same day. I watched her absorb the fact that she could no longer use his illness as a broom to sweep away his choices. Derek stood. This is insane. I looked at him. No. This is a boundary with legal language. He pointed at me. You'll split this family apart, I answered quietly. You already did. I'm just refusing to hold the pieces together with my skin. No one spoke after that. The sentence stayed in the room longer than I expected. Maybe because it was true. Maybe because every person at that table had benefited from a younger version of me, believing peace meant swallowing whatever they handed me. Lauren sat down slowly. No longer in my grandfather's chair like a queen, but like someone realizing the chair had never belonged to her. What do you want? She asked. It was not surrender. It was negotiation, but negotiation was more honest than concern. I want the independent review to proceed. I said. I want Marla's department preserved for investigation. I want Brandon removed from consideration for any role created through that process. I want every intern terminated under those evaluation patterns contacted through proper channels. And I want you to resign your family board seat before the board votes to remove you under Arthur's memorandum. Lauren laughed once. Harsh and disbelieving. You can't be serious. I looked at Mr. Bell. He slid a prepared resignation form across the table. The sound of paper moving over polished wood felt louder than shouting. Lauren stared at the form as if it were an insult with margins. Derek started to speak. But his wife touched his arm. Suddenly practical. The family board allies looked at each other and saw liability sitting between the coffee cups. Lauren did not sign then. I had not expected her to. People like Lauren do not release power because it is right. They release it when holding on becomes more expensive than letting go. I stood and buttoned my coat. At the door. Lauren followed me into the foyer. For a second, with the chandelier light above us and the old staircase behind her, I saw the woman who had once brought casseroles after my mother died. I wanted there to be something human left under all that control. Then she whispered, Your mother would be ashamed of what you're doing to this family. The sentence hit exactly where she aimed it. For one breath, I was 14 again. Standing in a black dress. Being told my grief was inconvenient. Then I became 27 again. I looked at her and said, My mother left me one lesson you never understood. Love without respect is just ownership wearing perfume. Lauren's face tightened. I opened the front door myself. Do not use her name to make me smaller again. Mr. Scram. Bell stepped out behind me. The cold air felt clean. As we walked down the stone steps, I did not look back at the house. Some places stop being haunted the moment you stop asking them to bless you. The next 2 weeks were not cinematic. They were interviews, access logs, metadata reviews, uncomfortable calls, and long meetings where people used careful words, because careful words are what come after careless harm. Marla was placed on leave, then terminated for cause after the review confirmed altered records, undisclosed family preference, and improper separation documents. Her assistant admitted she had changed evaluation language under Marla's direction. Brandon's proposed role was dissolved. He sent one angry email to Mr. Bell, copying 3 board members by mistake, which did more for accountability than any speech I could have given. Lauren resigned 4 days before the board meeting. Her letter used the phrase to preserve family unity, which made me laugh for the first time in a week. She did not apologize. Marla did not apologize either. That used to matter to me. It mattered less once the people they hurt began receiving calls from the review team. 2 former interns had their records corrected. One was offered back pay for unpaid work hours that had been mislabeled as voluntary development time. The warehouse clerk's complaint was reopened under outside supervision. Gina stayed. Not because I asked her to, but because she wanted to see whether Whitmore could become a place worth staying. Calvin Reese agreed to oversee a temporary ethics committee with employee representation from the plant. Not just executives with clean shoes. Luis received a formal apology for being instructed to escort out staff without complete documentation. He shrugged when I told him, embarrassed by gratitude. Then said, "Just make sure the next person doesn't ride down alone like that." That became the first sentence in my transition notes. My grandfather came back to the building 3 months later in a wheelchair. Thinner. Slower. But fully himself. We entered through the same lobby where I had carried the empty box. Employees gathered without being told. Not cheering exactly. Because real workplaces are not movies. But they stopped. They stood. Some smiled. Some cried quietly. Arthur looked at the brass words under his portrait for a long time. Then looked at me. "Still true?" he asked. I crouched beside his chair. "It's becoming true again," I said. After the board meeting, I went alone to the intern desk. It had been reassigned to a young man from the same partnership program. A nervous accounting student named Mateo, who had labeled every folder in perfect handwriting. The ceramic mug was gone. Probably returned to Gina. In its place sat a sticky note taped to the monitor. "Ask questions. Keep records. You belong here." I did not know who wrote it. I did not need to. The desk no longer felt like a grave, it felt like a warning had become a promise. I kept the cardboard box. For months. It sat in the corner of my office. Empty. Ugly. And useful. Visitors assumed I had forgotten to throw it away. I had not. It reminded me that power is not proven by how many people you can remove from a room. Power is proven by whether people are safer after you enter it. Marla used a box to make me feel disposable. I used the memory of it to build a rule. No one at Whitmore would be walked out publicly without documented cause and review. People asked whether I forgave them. They meant Marla. Brandon. Lauren. Sometimes even my grandfather. I learned to dislike that question. Forgiveness is too often treated like a receipt the injured person owes everyone else, so the room can feel clean again. I forgave my grandfather in pieces. Through hard conversations where love did not excuse the pain but survived it. I did not forgive Marla because she never sought forgiveness. I did not forgive Lauren because she only regretted losing leverage. And I stopped explaining why. The family house was eventually sold. Lauren fought it. Then lost interest when she realized no room in it could make her powerful again. Before the sale, I walked through once with my grandfather. In the dining room. He touched the back of his old chair and said, "Your grandmother hated this table." I laughed because I had never heard that before. She said it made people perform dinner instead of eat it. He told me. We stood there quietly. 2 survivors of the same beautiful, broken place. And I felt something loosen. Healing did not feel soft. It felt like signing papers with steady hands. It felt like correcting records for people who thought nobody remembered them. It felt like letting some relatives call me cruel and not rushing to prove I was kind. It felt like understanding that silence had once protected me. But it was not meant to become my home. There is a moment after betrayal when people expect you to become smaller. Grateful for any corner they leave you. That moment is where a boundary can begin. I still walk through the Whitmore lobby most mornings. My grandfather's portrait remains on the wall. But beside it now hangs a newer plaque. Smaller and less grand. It reads, "Trust is measured when the person in front of you has no power to punish you." Some people call that a policy statement. To me, it is a memory. It is Luis in the elevator. Gina with her laptop. A fake evaluation with a stolen signature. A family table where porcelain could not soften the truth. Marla thought she fired a lazy intern. Brandon thought I was holding his place. Lauren thought family meant I would stay quiet to protect the name. They were all wrong in different ways. But they made the same mistake. They believed power was something you had to announce before it mattered. My grandfather taught me better. Even through his mistakes. Real power is not the name on the badge. The chair at the table. Or the door someone opens for you. Real power is knowing when to stop begging for a place and start deciding what kind of place deserves you. For a long time, I thought power meant having your name on the door, your chair at the table, and people lowering their voices when you walked into a room. I was wrong. Real power is what you do when someone weaker than you is standing in front of you. It is whether you protect them, use them, erase them, or finally decide they matter. Marla thought she fired a lazy intern. Brandon thought I was only holding his place. Lauren thought family meant I would swallow the truth to protect a name. They were all wrong. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is not powerless. Sometimes she is just waiting for the right moment to open the folder.